Well, thank you all very much. This award means such a great deal to me, not so much as a recognition of what I have done, but because it comes from you, those of you who I respect so much for what you have done. And there's so many people in this room this evening that should be standing here, and especially you, Tom, and what the Religious Freedom Institute has done. You're the true heroes of religious liberty. And you've done so much to protect our liberty that, and that of others around the world, I am honored to be associated with you, and most especially that you would consider me worthy to be a colleague. I'm also so very grateful to my brother Knights of Columbus, whose dedication and sacrifice to preserve religious liberty here and abroad have been a true inspiration to me for many, many years. The Knights of Columbus have a long record of standing strong in defense of religious liberty, whether it was in front of the firing squads of federales in Mexico or in front of burning crosses of the Ku Klux Klan. This tradition continues in the Knights of Columbus, and it has grown stronger in recent years. And I am more proud than I can say this evening to have worked side by side with so many great and dedicated Catholic men. Tonight, I would like to speak about the increasing threat to religious liberty in America and the challenge it presents to people of faith, especially those people committed to protecting the free exercise of religion. And the threat is this: one side of today's cultural debate is increasingly influenced by a way of thinking that sees not just a very limited role for religious liberty, but ultimately sees no room for the free exercise of religion. My own thinking in the matter has relied on the work of two great French Christians, the late Protestant moral philosopher Paul Ricoeur and the Catholic theologian Henri de Lubac. Ricoeur is known to many for describing Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Sigmund Freud as the masters of suspicion. Although these three thinkers were very different, Ricoeur argues that their view of religion was very similar. The masters of suspicion was his shorthand way of describing the way each of them attacked religion, and especially how each of them attacked Christianity. Each of the three maintained that the problem was not just that people have wrong ideas that need to be corrected, but that people have an entirely wrong way of looking at reality, and that way must be replaced. People have a false consciousness, a flawed understanding of the world around them that makes it impossible for them to do what is necessary to achieve a just society, individual freedom, and personal fulfillment. Ricoeur says that Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, each in his own way, sought to destroy the illusions of what they considered to be a false consciousness. Marx in the area of politics and economy, Nietzsche in the context of morality and autonomy, and Freud in science and psychoanalysis. Each sought to destroy a false consciousness and wake up society to a new narrative of reality. And each considered religion, and particularly Christianity, to be the false narrative that must be rejected as the precondition to realizing a new society capable of achieving human happiness. I think we're all familiar with Karl Marx's famous phrase that religion is the opium of the people. But what he said right after that is even more important. He said, the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is required for their real happiness. Religious belief for Marx is the false consciousness which prevents the liberation of society. And therefore, he insists that the criticism of religion is the prerequisite of all criticism. Nietzsche's approach is similar. He calls Christianity a slave religion. And he says its celebration of the poor in spirit makes individual autonomy and personal freedom impossible. Only the death of God, he says, can make men and women truly free. And as you would expect, Freud is more complicated. But his approach to religion is clear from the title of his best-selling book on religion, The Future of an Illusion. The problem for Freud is not that religion is a bad idea, but that religion is tied inescapably to mental illness. He writes this: one might venture to regard obsessional neurosis as a pathological counterpoint of the formation of a religion, and to describe religion as a universal neurosis. As Ricoeur points out, for Freud, man is neurotic insofar as he is religious, and religious insofar as he is neurotic. Since I first wrote about this some years ago in my book, A Civilization of Love, I'm more convinced than ever that as our country's public debates increasingly focus on which side may be, as the saying goes, following the science, Freud's approach may be the most dangerous to religious liberty in America. But regardless of which of the three may be most influential, Ricoeur's point is that they continue to have a powerful influence because of the way they attacked religion. They are more than just historical curiosities. Ricoeur called them the masters of suspicion. I think of them as the founding fathers of modern atheism. Now, to the extent one considers religion evil, to be something equivalent to addiction, slavery, or mental illness, one is not inclined to give the exercise of religion a privileged place in law or society. Instead, we would expect to see precisely what is happening: increasing pressure to minimize religious influence in society. But in the future, even a limited space for religion may be too generous. In the worldviews of Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, there is no place for religion, because religion is the fundamental barrier to the realization of a just society, according to Marx, human freedom, according to Nietzsche, and human well-being and flourishing, according to Freud. Henri de Lubac reaches a similar conclusion in his intellectual history of atheism entitled The Drama of Atheist Humanism. He writes, "Atheism is, at the very root of it, an anti-theism." Now, you may judge for yourself the extent to which this type of thinking already has conditioned the intellectual culture of America's elite institutions of higher education, has seeped into the groundwater of America's elite progressive power centers. But it is wishful thinking to assume that it is not influencing the thinking of future generations of lawyers, judges, and policymakers who are now studying at those institutions, and how they will someday regard religion, its value, and its place within society. This is changing the ground rules of the culture war in America. and in the future it will do so in more explicit ways. The embrace of atheism as a new civil religion is becoming more militant. Consider another French philosopher, Bernard-Henri Lévy, recommendation in his book, Left in Dark Times. He insists that the only way forward for the political left is a methodical atheism, and he politics focused, quote, to get rid not only of old beliefs, but of the belief in belief. He argues for a politics based on the idea that heaven is empty, and whatever idols remain in the old way of thinking must be smashed. Nearly 30 years ago, Yale law professor Stephen Carter, in The Culture of Disbelief, described the way our law and politics increasingly trivialized religious devotion. But we have moved beyond a culture of disbelief to a new culture of anti-belief. This is what the new culture war is now about. For some time now, we have watched the emergence of a naked public square, watched as, in Lévy's phrase, the remaining idols of an empty heaven are being smashed. Yet culture, like nature, abhors a vacuum. The naked public square cannot stay naked for very long. Someone always comes along with a new set of clothes, especially in the area of morality. This is precisely the point for Ricoeur. The complete deconstruction of the old order is the prerequisite for achieving the new order of justice, freedom, and human flourishing. Nietzsche writes this: up to the present, the assault against Christianity has not only been faint-hearted, it has been wide of the mark. So long as Christian ethics are not felt to be a capital crime against life, their defenders will have the game in their hands. The problem of the truth of Christianity, the existence of its God, or the historicity of its legend, is in itself a very subsidiary problem. So long as the value of Christian ethics goes unquestioned. So a false ethics must be entirely displaced once the false consciousness that sustains it is deconstructed. But more than that, the false ethics must be seen as not only false, it must be seen as evil, as hurtful and cruel, as a crime against life. So Nietzsche's quote from more than a century ago, that Christian ethics is a capital crime against life, is also one of the best descriptions of the tactics now being used in our current cultural debate to displace the traditional Christian ethics around life, marriage, family, and gender. The implication of these tactics for the free exercise of religion are unavoidable. Today we are on very different cultural ground than were the framers of the First Amendment. Whether the framers are Christians or deists, they agreed on an essential point. There is an objective, transcendent reality, and they agreed that each individual has a responsibility to explore and discover the nature of this transcendent reality and to conform his or her life to that understanding. And they also agreed that this responsibility is so constitutive of what it means to be a free human being that government should only have a very limited role in the matter. That is why they gave us the language of the free exercise of religion. James Madison neatly summed up the idea when he wrote, "Religion, or the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of discharging it, can only be directed by reason and conviction, not by force or violence." The First Amendment's guarantee of religious liberty reflects and is grounded in a culture of belief. No one in this room needs to be told that today that culture of belief is under a sustained attack. Standing against the culture of belief that gave rise to our religious liberty protections is an emerging culture of anti-belief. That is to say, a secular, materialist culture that rejects notions of transcendence and considers the idea of transcendent reality in itself to be dangerous. In many ways, this culture of anti-belief mimics the elements of religious belief, and some have even suggested the idea of a pseudo-religion that rivals and seeks to replace traditional Christian belief in the cultural spacers once filled by our Judeo-Christian heritage. So the question is, in what way can liberty, and more specifically, religious liberty, be grounded in a culture of anti-belief? Consider what Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote in the 1992 case Planned Parenthood versus Casey. At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Now, we may agree or disagree with Justice Kennedy, but clearly, Justice Kennedy is saying something very different than James Madison. And that difference is increasingly reflected in our elite institutions. The questions we need to ask are, to what extent religion and religious belief are already regarded by those elites as nothing more than a personal narrative of the mystery of human life? And to what extent can religious liberty survive in this cultural ground? In Casey, Justice Kennedy's description of liberty was used to defend conduct that was consistent with his view of a constitutional right to abortion. But what do we think will be the outcome when an individual's meaning of life narrative conflicts with another, perhaps more popular, constitutional liberty? Or when that personal narrative is alleged to be the product of social privilege or mental illness? Or when that personal narrative does not follow the science but runs counter to it? We don't need a crystal ball to see where this is all heading. So what is to be done? First, there needs to be more public debate about the philosophical assumptions underlying our current cultural conflict, how those assumptions are marginalizing religion in our national life, and the extent to which those assumptions are influencing present legal thinking and policy making. It may do so to an even greater extent in the future. More of us need to speak up and challenge those assumptions. Second, the great work accomplished by so many organizations represented here tonight must continue in our courts and our legislatures, and there should be even greater cooperation among all those committed to the robust protection of our religious liberty. The cultural conflict in which we are engaged is being played out in our courts and our legislatures, in our media and our schools, and increasingly in our economic, corporate, and financial enterprises. We must continue to be vigilant in all these areas. All this is necessary, but it is not sufficient. This brings me to my third point. People of faith need to exercise their religious belief in more demonstrable ways. Consider the little sisters of the poor and their witness and their litigation before the Supreme Court. They are true heroes, yet their heroism had nothing to do with the self-interested carving out of a legal exception to create a safe space for their narrative on the meaning of life. And attempts to characterize what the little sisters were about in this way failed. And they failed not so much because of the brilliance of the little sisters' rhetoric, but because of the brilliance of their lives dedicated to helping the poor and the suffering. I do not know if any of the little sisters have read what James Madison wrote about the First Amendment. But I can think of none better who are living lives dedicated to what he envisioned the role of religious liberty would mean in America. People of integrity, living lives dedicated in an uncompromising way to the duty they believe they owe to their Creator and to their fellow citizens. These are the lives that build a culture of belief, and more of us should follow their example. People defend and they protect what they value, that which brings value to their lives and to society. Our ultimate, and I believe decisive defense of religious liberty is to live out our religious faith so that others can see its value, to demonstrate by our lives the reality of the transcendent and how that reality lifts up the world around us and makes it a better place. At the heart of religious liberty is something fundamental, the extent to which we live in a way that affirms, respects, and communicates the transcendent dignity of every person. This is the ground in which religious liberty will flourish. We must defend the spiritual character and transcendent dignity of each person. We must not allow any person to be reduced to the level of the material world. Easy to say, but how to proceed? Perhaps we should listen to the person who more than any other in our lifetime devoted her life precisely to this work. Mother Teresa of the Missionaries of Charity gave us a simple formula. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. The fruit of service is peace. So how do we overcome the emerging culture of anti-belief? Lives of faith, love, service, and peace. This is a good place to start. This is how we will build a new culture of belief, a culture that will cherish and sustain the free exercise of religion. What means the most to me this evening is to be here with you, Americans, united together in the great cause that is America, the cause of liberty, and the first freedom which sustains it. Thank you all very much.